Welcome back to the Scenery Farm. I'm going to build a door flat from start to finish. Uh, this is not the only way to build a door flat by any stretch of the imagination. It's a pretty standard, basic door flat. The overall outside dimensions are 4 foot by 10 foot. It's a 36 by 80 door. When I'm putting this together, I'm going to put the frame together with 7/16 crown 8 or 16 gauge staple or standard crown. The bottom plates there are made out of plywood because they're teeny, and going in the end of them, they're going to split. All these internal reframe pieces, they're made out of pine. Uh, I find they last just fine in there. And these are the two legs I'm building on either side of the door. And the dimension of the pine is 3/4 by 2.5. You can see a pretty decent shot of what it looks like there. We're going at about 3 times speed. So when I'm making these, and I'm just going to continue framing, and it's pretty obvious what I'm doing, but I'll just keep talking. This door is going into, I actually don't know the location. To be honest, someone just asked me to bake a bunch of door flats, or a couple door flats and a whack of 4x10s and a whack of whaler and some jacks. And I said, okay. So we're making it with the threshold plate. And we're affixing the jamb for the door hard into the frame, where if you were doing this in a house, you would never do that because of the variation in the rough opening. So that's just a spacer to keep the bottom 4 feet apart for when I'm doing the skinning. I'm just putting on my glue as I normally do. And I've pre-cut all the pieces for this. You can see in the background off the left of the screen there, there's a door flat already made. So I just cut everything for both of them as I was working through the project. Where did I put the narrow crown? You can get it. So at any rate, we're hard affixing the, obviously I'm just using narrow crown to put the skin on those two legs. We're hard affixing the jamb in place. And the trick with that is to ensure that the actual door flat is sitting level wherever it is, and then all the dimensions around it will work. And then you also have to make sure it's plumb, because you put the doorstop in before you put the door on, in this case, which is odd if you're a house person. But in door flat land, this is actually a smarter way to do it, because by putting the doorstop in place on something that can flex and move around, you're actually then giving yourself a reference point for plumb when you're putting it all together. It's backwards, and once you do it, that might make sense. But if you flex a door flat, it changes where the doorstop would want to be. So I just do it by math in this case. I'm putting a mark on either side and striking a line for where the toggle is there, just below 10 feet. It's about 18 inches down or something like that. And once I've got the luan in place, I've stapled it all in place, I clean up the glue, because you can get all over the bearings when you're doing the flush trim, and it can shorten the life of your bearings. And just sanding. This is the luan's not the greatest quality luan that I'm using. Supply chain's doing wonderful things to the quality we're getting and things. So that was me. I put a 1/4 crown staple in, but it hit the fastener in the corner, and I know better, but I still did it. So it didn't go all the way down, so I just took a nail set and fixed it. Once that's all sanded and ready to go, I take the, look at me waddling around the shop there, that's fun. 3 times speed. I'm just using a flush trim router, and I'm just making the luan fit the pine. In the land of milk and honey, where luan is in your world, or Moranti, or mahogany doorskin, or underlayment, or whatever you want to call it, is perfectly square, and it's perfectly 4x8. That's got to be nice. Ours is not perfectly 4x8. Oh, come on. There you go. So we trim it to the frame. Once we've squared it up on 2 corners, 2 adjacent edges. So that's all flush trimmed. Put that away. what's my next thing? What am I going to do? All right, I'm going to put the door jamb in place. So I've set it up so the door jamb is just 3.5 inches deep, just to make the wall look a little thicker, because it's the door jamb that gives a reference for how thick the wall is, and um, this is all this one needed. I've cut all these pieces to fit already. This plywood is actually a 1/16 of an inch under 3/4. It's 18 mil. Thereabouts a 1/16, close enough for what we do. And it actually makes the door opening just a little wider. Fit all these things already to make sure they work. And I just 7/16 crown these dudes in place to one another. And then once I have it together, then I'm just going to drop it into the rough opening. It actually fits. It's just that because it's such tight tolerances, I had to have it go in level, so it wasn't longer on the hypotenuse, if that makes sense to anybody. So all I'm doing here is I'm flushing this up to the face. And if I were doing a different door in a different situation, I'd have an oversized rough opening, and then I'd be using shim stock like you would in a house to make the jamb perfect and all that perfect. But in this case, I'm going the other way. I'm having the squareness of the flat actually be the guide for the jamb. And because it's flush trimmed to the louis and the louis is square, then you can actually get away with this and have your door jamb fit right up against the rough opening. I am putting in screws in behind where the doorstop is going to be, so they don't have to be painted or filled and painted later. So I'm using the doorstop to hide those screws. And yeah, so in other door flats, I'd put them together with multiple pieces, and I wouldn't have a threshold plate. There's lots of different ways to do a door flat. So by no means is this the definitive and only one way to do it. Some of you might not have seen a threshold plate before. So in this, what I'm doing is I know that the hinge is going to be 6 inches from the top of the door, and the top of the bottom hinge is going to be 68 inches from the top of the door. And I'm putting a 3/16 gap at the top, which is somewhat gappy for a house door. But because this is a scenic door and the flat might be a little off skew, it builds in extra tolerance. So I've marked it, the top of the hinge, 68 3/16 from the top of the inside of the jamb, and the top hinge is 6 inches and 3/16. This is a little better shot here. I've marked it out. I am now just using the hammer to, and I'm being really mean to my chisel the way I'm using a hammer, but I'm going into plywood, so, sometimes you're mean. And all I'm doing is I'm marking out, I've marked it out with a pencil. I'm just using a chisel to rough it out. This is a top bearing, a very rather short top bearing bit, and I've set it to depth. And now I'm just eyeballing the recess that the hinge goes in, and I've cleaned it out so it's pretty close to those chiseled lines. And then what I do once I've finished this is I get the chisel and I square it off and clean it, finish cleaning it up. I mean, if you have a hinge jig, well, what do you need me for? Use the hinge jig. I have one, they're great. I only had 2 doors to do, so I just did this by hand. Multiple doors, I'll pull it out. Interesting. Finish squaring those out. And once I've finished squaring those out, meanness to my chisel again. There we go. Happy days. Now, when you're going to do this, keep in mind your door is a wedge shape. The face of the door, the face that the barrel of the hinge goes against, is wider than the back of the door, to allow for, well, it helps with the hinge and it helps with the swing of the door. And those stickers, can't they figure out a way to make those stickers less sticky? just so you can peel them off without a hairdryer. I just did that off camera. I've marked 6 inches from the top of the door and 68 inches from the top of the door. Get ye old hinge in there. And now I do the exact same thing on the top and the bottom of the hinge. I use, and this is how I would normally use it, the side of the hammer or a mallet. The top and the bottom of the hinge I do with the chisel, but I don't do the long edge of the hinge with the chisel because it'll just separate the meso from the door. So for that, what I do is I take my knife and I just score along the line. And that way I have better control. Great, block the shot with your arm, James. At any rate, I have better control there. And then I just do the recess again for the hinge. I have a fairly wide, I've added a plate, I've made a bigger plate with a piece of plexi in my router so I can hold it low down and have better control for moments like this. Well, it's a nice old, this is my first trim router I ever had. I remember getting it and it was in 98, I think it was. Yeah. Everybody in the shop ended up picking up one of these. It's got an angled base on it too, which is sometimes pretty useful. And a different base. So I'm squaring these up, as you can see. And it's spruce. I think it's spruce. It's a soft wood, spruce or pine or something like that. Cleaning that up. Put the hinge in, mark the circles. I'm pretty sure it's spruce because of the way it reacted to the punch I used. It still drifted. So now I'm just eyeballing this in the center of the holes because the punch in the centering bit wasn't playing very nice on the other door. I do the same thing on the inside of the jamb. Mark them, and it usually gets these within a mil or so. It's pretty close, and you can just do a little tap with the hammer to fine adjust it. And I put these on now when I actually should have waited until I was done with casing out the door, because I round over the casing after I've installed it, and the barrel on the hinge on the inside of the jamb was in the way. I've been reflecting upon this. I have this is only one place where I have hardware stored, and I have so many different types of hardware. I have boxes for all of it, and at some point I'm going to have to just stop and organize it, color code it, because I keep moving them around everywhere. And if they were color coded, I'd keep them more similar. I'd keep them in the one spot they're supposed to be, and I'd look for it in the one spot. But you can see all the different colors of tape on there. I just keep on changing what's in them, and if I get something, it goes in a bigger drawer somewhere else if I get a lot of something. Just using a punch there to pull the pin out of the barrel there. If you don't pre-drill, you can probably get away without pre-drilling on the door jamb if you have good screws that have a pre-drill on the end of them. But on those doors, if you don't pre-drill them, boy, you'll really regret it. They'll split on you. What am I doing? Oh, I'm marking where the doorstop is going to go. I just have set the square for just a hair over 1 3/8 inches, which is the thickness of the door. And that way I can come back, and I pre-cut all this casing last time on that previous door that's up there behind me. So that's going to be where the face of the doorstop goes. My doorstop is rather utilitarian. It's just sanded and finished. Oh, I'm out of nails. 16 gauge 1.5 pins. It's a 1/2 inch MDF that's been sanded and rounded over, then painted, actually for another purpose that I just cut into and turned it into doorstop because its other purpose was no longer a thing. And I don't mind having oversized doorstop like this because at the end of the day, this is a door that's going to be, I mean, it's got bigger gaps in and around it than you would in a household door. It's got a 1/2 inch gap at the bottom of the door, or thereabouts, maybe 7/16. And oh, this door, I've actually made the actual flat 1/8 of an inch less than 10 feet tall. So that will be the threshold plate that goes on the bottom that'll take up that last 1/8 of an inch. So I'm nailing, but I'm nailing into the cross pieces in the framing. I'm not having big nails just hang out the back of the door flat. Now I nail at the bottom, but then I kind of stop part way up because you got to put the top piece of the casing in. One nail to act like a pivot point. Make sure those corners line up, and then you can finish nailing both of them. Yep, there you go. Nail the miter. There you go. So it's just 1x3 I've used on this. And then I have to take off the hinges because they're going to interfere with the router bearing. And don't leave them down below because they're about to get covered in sawdust. And you can, make it hard to find those things afterwards. There's a 3/16 or 1/4 inch, I can't remember, round over bit on that router. And the flat itself has that round over on the edge. I find if you butt 2 flats together that have that round over, it's easier to fill the seam. Gives the fill somewhere to go instead of surface filling it. And put the hinge back in. And once I'm done that, I think the next thing I do is the threshold plate. And for that, I'll go over to my Metal World and work in there. So this, I think the bottom stretcher, I'm blowing it off. Oh no, I'm filling it next. That's right. While it's on the bench, might as well fill all the holes. Where's my stuff? There's my stuff. There's some mud. It's been water's been added to this, and it's had a good mix. And it actually came out of a box of mud, and I reused the bucket. I'm cleaning off the knives there. And because I can't do long swaths of fill on things, I'm just using an 1.5 or 2 inch knife just to fill the individual holes. And I don't bother changing knives, and I'm filling all the holes for the trim as I go, the casing as I go as well. And this is drywall compound because it's getting a primer on it. I wouldn't, if it were not getting a primer, it'd go right to paint. I'd probably use something like Drydex, which is a fill that doesn't require a primer on top of it. Yep. Almost there. Almost there. And I'll give this a wee sand before it gets on the truck. I'm just cleaning off anything on the corners. Throw out the drywall compound that was on the knives that picked up the sawdust. So it's going to be going, I have a carpenter's bench back there, and it's got a nice big wooden vise in it. I'm going to pull this off, and I just made way for this flat to eventually get put in there. So this is 1/8 inch by 3 inch flat bar. It's amazing how floppy it is. It's certainly not that floppy when you get into the shorter pieces. It's just because it's so long. Yeah. I'm marking out 4 feet on that. I can't line up the line because I put the line in the wrong spot, so I put a square on it and have the line go all the way across. Lock it in place. Now this is a cold saw. It's going really fast actually in the speed up thing. You can see the oil just moving off the edge there, it's going to drip all over the floor. So I just put a rag there to keep the oil from going everywhere. This is water-based oil. I'm punching, I've marked it. I'm just punching where I want the holes to be. And I use a hole that the screws can get through, but the head of the screw will not go through. I'm going to use number 8 1.5 flat screws, flathead screws. Once that's done, I just get the bit and I just drill the holes through, and I do that. There's 8 holes in each one of these plates, one for each door. I obviously did this before I built the other door because it's all done. So I'm putting some oil on there, and I have a countersink, and that's going to be the bottom of the plate that sits on the floor, and that's where the screw goes in. And those holes actually go into the pine uprights that are the legs on either side of the legs. I put a number 8 3/4 inch in there, and then I countersink each one of those holes. You have to make sure that the legs don't twist on you. 1.5 inch screws going in now. And so the threshold plate, once it's in, it's a beautiful thing. I can take the flat, stick it inside the vise on my bench just so it won't fall over. And then I take a level and I shim up the bottom plate so that the flat is actually level on the ground. If it isn't level on the ground, your opening is going to be off. This is me just marrying up the hinges. I have to give it some tender love with a bit of a hammer tap for them to line up. And then once that's done, put the pin in, get the other pin in. It's easier to do the top one first because it's going to hang. If you do the bottom one, it's going to sag on you away from the opening, which is a bit annoying. Tender love with a bit of a thing. I give it a bit of a move, and that'll, once the pin goes in, by moving it, it allows it to go in a little nicer. So I take a piece of wood, a longer piece of wood, and a block, and then what I do is I just shim up the bottom of the door with the block so the door isn't going to move when I'm actually working on it. Measure off 36 inches from deck or from the bottom of the door. I get my center hole for the barrel bolt. I'm not going to actually use a standard strike plate or standard barrel and strike plate. I'm going to use a bullet catch. Not barrel bolt. I think I said barrel bolt earlier. That was silly. I just used my countersink to do a pre-drill. Hole saw. Come in from one side until the mandrel is sticking out the other side. Finish it off so it's a nice clean hole. Then I have a 7/8 of an inch spade bit. I already pre-drill and mark that. Then I take my barrel bolt, put it on there. It's got a very, very tiny plate. If this were somewhere other than where it's going, I'd countersink that, but it's teeny. There's a big opening, and you can get away without it. So a bullet catch is it kind of looks like a bullet head, but it's on a spring, so it by friction goes up against its own strike plate. That's just a dish, essentially. Now I'm using a standard handle as a standard handle from a passage set as a dummy handle, but it actually came with the standard hardware. Like this could be a working door, and all the holes I'm using, I did the right back set for the actual door hardware. Now I rub it up against the inside of the jamb. I get a wee mark there, so I know from that mark where it is. I center it on the opening, and I take the strike plate for the bullet catch, mark the hole, take a pre-drilled countersink, and the underside of that has a bit of a flare of metal that needs to go into the countersink head. And so I'm using Phillips, the hardware that came with it. There you go, and there it's going to stop. And I'm remembering what I need to do next. Get a piece of wood, mark the length of the piece of wood, get a spacer because that's the thickness of the door casing that's on the door, and put it in with 1.25" screws so they don't stick out the back. And then I have 1.75", I think, that are going to go through and keep the door from opening. And that's pretty much the door done. There's one last step, and that's to take the original door hardware and have it travel with the handle in case they want to use that. You all take care. Bye.